Hey, what's up guys? JB here. We're back again with more Final Fantasy IX today, and we have none other than Monkey Boy Zidane. I do apologize for being a little bit late on this one, guys. With the holiday season in full swing, things have just been a little bit crazy as of late. Now, I know a lot of people have been hyped for this collab, and especially with this unit being a fan favorite character. I know for me, he's definitely been up there among some of my favorites, and certainly within Final Fantasy IX, I think he's probably within the top 1 or 2 characters. So now that he's here in War of the Visions, how is he actually holding up, and what are going to be the various strengths and weaknesses of this character? Well, as we do, let's dive in and let's find out. Zidane, however you want to say it, is joining War of the Visions as a new 100 cost wind unit. He is going to be repping that dagger group, making it oh so confusing with how they've decided to name Garnet in the game. He has a base 3-2 movement and he wears hats and cloth. Starting with the TMR, this one's pretty decent, this one's okay. It actually does give him a couple of things here that actually would have been nice to see within his main kit. This one's giving that 35% 3-hit physical barrier, as well as a 30 accuracy buff. The base stats on the piece overall aren't really all that exciting, but I can maybe see this one being used maybe on some units out there that maybe don't have the greatest self buffs. Looking now at his stats, pretty decent overall stat picture here. He's above average in just about every category. HP, attack, luck, and dex all looking very, very good. It's that agility number though that's really jumping off the page, coming in at a 70 innate value, which is amongst the top tier in the game. Now he does have an agility passive on top of that you can potentially use, which would actually put him as the fastest unit in all of War of the Visions. Now the nice thing about Zidane is he doesn't even need that passive. You can certainly go without it and he's still going to be very, very fast. Now, even Zidane's evasion and crit evasion potential, utilizing and bringing in some passives that he has access to, you can certainly build and lean into those directions, and he's going to be pretty good in those departments as well. Really, the only thing falling down for me here is that innate accuracy, which at a 167 innate value has him just missing that average mark. And unfortunately, he doesn't really have any way to bump that up any further. No passives or masteries or abilities that are going to increase that any further. So that's actually a little bit disappointing, especially with such strong base dex and luck numbers. Moving down now into his mitigations, we're looking at 0 defense and 0 spirits. We have several nice resistances though, 15% to slash and strike, as well as a 20% against magic. Zidane is carrying 2 weaknesses here though, with a -5 against pierce and a 10% weakness against missile. For his mastery ability, we have a 10% unit resistance as well as 20% reaction block. Definitely 2 things that I always like to see in these mastery abilities. Now if you do take him all the way up to level 140, he's going to pick up another 20% reaction block, gets him up to 40% out of the box, and then he's getting a 30% acquired AP perk, as well as a skill upgrade to his Punishing Blade ability. Now this one is actually not my favorite Dream Awakening. I think maybe they could have actually given him a little bit more here. That 30% acquired AP, while it certainly is nice, it just feels a little bit underwhelming, compared to some other things he could have received here. For his passive abilities, I think the 2 that I'd most often use are going to be the ones that have the attack and then the penetration values associated with them. Now, unfortunately, Zidane doesn't have his 2 relevant penetrations built into one passive like we've seen on many other damage-dealing units recently. And at the end of the day, I do think that hurts him a little bit, especially from a build flexibility standpoint. He does have several other nice passives that would be nice to use and potentially pull in. And feeling a bit tied into those 2 first ones that we talked about, I think does put a little bit of a strain on him from a build perspective. For his counter ability, he's got a pretty nice one here, especially if you are going up against slash and strike units, where he can reduce that up to 30% of that damage at a very high 70% proc rate. Currently though, at least in terms of our meta right now, we are in a very magic-focused meta. So maybe not as much value there, at least currently, depending on the matchups that you're seeing. Zidane though does have access to another 2 pretty nice preemptive attack counters that he can use, so you can certainly pull those in, depending on the matchups that you're seeing. Moving now into the main kit, and we're going to start off with his buffs. His first buff is called Critical Air. This one's going to pass 20 crit damage as well as 25 unit resist onto your allies, while also buffing 20 wind attack and 40 slash res penetration onto Zidane. This is a nice buff, 4 really nice effects here, and it's definitely going to help out his offensive potential, especially early on in the fights where maybe you're going up against a very slash resistant tank. His second buff is called Thief Smarts. This one's going to give him Courage, 25% reduced magical damage taken for 3 turns, It also provides him a way to seal his opponent's re-raise removal capability, which is a first of its kind mechanic. Of course, we've seen the re-raise version recently there on Helena. Now finally, this does give him a 15 flat AP boost on top of that as well. So another very nice buff here for Zidane. Just keep in mind that you do need to apply that debuff onto your enemy before it actually takes effect. So there can be some RNG there, depending on if you hit them first or they hit you first. For attack skills, his low AP attack is called Mug. It has a range of 2 with a range height of 1. That low 121% mod. This one steals an item if it is available in a PvE mode. And it does also buff your agility by 25% for 3 turns. Now, this one I do actually quite like as a finisher skill, in that when you do get that killing blow, this is going to actually significantly increase your speed, especially in Zidane's case, who does have a very nice base agility. His second attack here is called Punishing Blade. This one is his marquee skill, and it gets a couple of upgrades here along the way. It gets up to a range of 6 here on the large cross AoE, coming in with that medium 165% modifier. Prior to the damage, we have 2 effects. It's breaking physical barriers just like Calculated Rend. This does also apply a follow-up attack to Zidane for 3 turns. And it will apply to this attack here as well when he casts it, since this buff does come in prior to the damage. Incredible attack on this one. It's really easy to hit multiple opponents with this large AoE. We've been seeing it for months now with Bradley. We're not done yet though with this skill. He does have 2 additional effects on this one coming after the damage. We're going to have a debuff of 40 healing power. It's pretty nice as a throw-in. Certainly I think would have been much better at 50 or higher with some of the healing power values we've seen on some of the recent tanks. Now finally, there's a second debuff here in that it will cancel any CT up effects that your opponents can potentially apply. So the most famous example is again that King Bradley example. He has a number of ways in his kit that he can actually amplify his CT. So as soon as you hit him and debuff him with this, that CT bonus will no longer be applied. Very, very strong overall skill here, and certainly I think is probably the best one overall in his kit. Now skill number 3 is called Intimidator. It's a range of 3 with a range height of 1. It's coming in with that large 200% mod, and it is a 2-hit attack. This one will reduce your target's crit evasion by 25%, so making them a little bit easier to crit. And the secondary effect here is a first of its kind in Peril. It's going to reduce your target's crit damage resistance by 20%. Now, I've been testing this one quite extensively this week, and in my testing, this is more or less acting as a final damage modifier, assuming that you do crit your target. And after that debuff is applied, all of your attacks, again assuming they are critting, will be increased by approximately 18 to 20% in the final damage. So again, this is another very strong skill in my opinion. My only real problem with this skill is as it pertains to the auto AI and its priority of it, as within the skill selection, this one is going to be 3rd or maybe even 4th in line when you look at it. Even if you are lined up with just a single target who may not have a barrier applied, the AI most often is going to go for either his Limit Burst or his Annoy skill, which is his Job 25 ability. We're going to look at that here in a moment. And that's simply because of the pre-damage effects that those 2 skills have, and for that reason I do believe that this was intentional to kind of have this as a manual control type ability, where I do actually see some potential use and potential strong use within guild raids or even manual PvP. Now his Job 25 ability is called Annoy. This one again is a range 3, range height 1. It's going to be coming in with that medium 165% mod. Now prior to the damage here, we do have an Imperil of 20 unit resistance. Very nice skill here, especially for increasing the potential of his follow-up attack damage. Now finally, we have the Limit Burst here. This one is Solution 9, so nice callback there to one of his ultimate attacks in the game. This one is a range 5, range height 2. It's going to be coming in with that standard 200% LB modifier. Prior to the damage, this one will increase his physical damage by 20%. So that damage again will apply to this skill and then anything thereafter. Post damage, this has another effect, and that's going to reduce his AP consumption by 30%. I like that as well because certainly these LBs are this one coming in at 43 AP. It is very costly to use, so this is actually going to make it easier to get up any follow-out attacks after that. So I think overall it's a pretty nice offensive kit here for Zidane. It's got a decent amount of utility. That follow-up attack actually does give him a pretty nice way to deal with courage units as well. Even re-raise in some cases if you are able to amp up the damage on the follow-up enough. And of course, he is joining a small handful of units that do have access to that very large AoE barrier break. Units like Bradley, Edward, and Sephiroth. Now, there is a brand new vision card that has come into the game this week alongside Zidane. This one is called Under the Red and Blue Moons. Very, very strong wind card here. You can see there is a lot of units there in that column. And in fact, with this job spread, I think it is covering the majority of relevant characters for the elements. Certainly the stats on the card have a lot to like here as well. Very nice bestowed and flat bonuses there. Now, this card does cover the spear, mace, and bow groups as well. So certainly some other up-and-coming groups there amongst the collection. So overall, I think this card is great. My only real issue with the card is that it's limited, and it is a new so-called holo card with kind of the fancy in-game graphical effect. And because of that, it does make it very expensive, not only to pull it, but also to build it, and that there's a little bit less access to shards with your vision stars. So I do think that is a hurdle for many, which is kind of a bummer here with this collaboration in my view. Now, purely from a mono-win team building perspective, do you actually need this card? I would say if you have Dark Tetra, I think that this card is skippable. I think where this card actually makes a case for you to pull it is if you are interested in the job capabilities of it, or potentially for the PvE mode effects that it has being a holo card. And I would say if you are interested in some of that job group play, I think this does offer a pretty nice combination of jobs. You think specifically about that spear group. That group has just gotten a brand new character over on the JP side with Young Eld. He will be coming here to our side of the game in just a couple of weeks, so maybe could be interesting from that angle there as well. I would say though that even with that, there are other cards within the spear group that do cover unit resistance, so definitely all things to keep in mind with this one. So speaking of the job groups, let's take a quick look at Zidane's dagger group. And that card that we were just looking at, it is the first card in the group that does cover that unit resistance effect. So I do think that is, a bit tough because, again, it is limited, it is expensive to build. Now it does actually share some overlap with the mace group when you look at the Great Demon card. That's another one there with both the mace and dagger groups, as well as the two Resnick cards that we got earlier in the year. So definitely, a pretty decent potential build angle that you could look at combining those two job groups. Aside from that, there's a little bit going on with the gun and red mage group. There's a couple cards that they share, but I think those two paths, they do need a little bit more marinating before they're ready. I would say overall, outside of that potential mace connection, I don't think that this group is really ready for really anything, especially when you do consider the units within it. The best ones next to Zidane are going to be Risol and Bold Leela, and while they're fine enough units, I just don't think they're competing at the top end of the game right now. So the dagger group, I think, is very much a work in progress right now, but I do think there is some promise for it. There is some potential here, especially if another strong dagger unit were to come in, maybe with another nice vision card, or perhaps maybe Risol gets a very strong MA2 here in the near future. Alright guys, we're on to the mock build here next, and I'm just going to be doing one build here this week. As we were just discussing there with the dagger group, I just don't think that it's ready for prime time, and I really, kind of looking at the different combinations, I wasn't really able to put together a team that I was happy with. So for that reason, I'm going to be sticking with the traditional mono win build here today. Now the specific build goal that we're going to have today is going to be going up against that light evasion team. Yes, I know that we all thought that it was dead, but Helena has necroed it from the grave. And if you've been playing Arena or Top 100 Guild War, I know that you've been seeing this build around. Now this win team is one that I have been testing extensively in mock battles as well as in Arena, and it has been performing pretty well overall. I don't think it's going to be the type of team that's going to be blowing out any doors for 6 stars every day, but I do think that you can get a reliable 3 stars out there minimum if you do tune it well. Now within this team, we're going to be pairing Zidane with the classic win duo of both Sadali and Glaciella, 2 units that are still holding up extremely well to this day. And 2 units you can probably make an argument for being 2 of the better investments ever in War of the Visions at this point. Now because we are going to be going up against that really min-max light evasion team, we're going to need to min-max our accuracy setup, and that's exactly what we're going to do here in this build today. Now in Zidane's case, as we looked at in the stats overview, his accuracy is very much middle of the road, so we really are going to need to go all out to get him to a reliable hit rate here. But as you're going to see, we are going to be able to get there, and you can certainly add some breathing room into it if you are able to bring in Glaciella's team buff as well. So for equipment here in the build, we are going to be using Zidane's Mage Masher that does come along with his event. That's going to up his reaction block to try and reduce any reflexing that's going on out there from those light units. It's also going to give him a bit of area resist because he doesn't have any of that innately. Now we're going to pair that with the White Marshmallow +6, not only for the accuracy that it brings, but also for the 50% sleep resistance. That's going to be very important for that Helena matchup and her Rose Blast ability. Now in the TMR slot, we're going to be using Ziza's Bells, not for the AP Restore, but for the raw agility and accuracy that it has in the base stats. For an Esper, we're going to be using the OG Odin. It's going to be built with accuracy and Human Killer. And that Human Killer in particular, that's going to be important to amplify his follow-up damage. For the vision cards, we're going to have area resist and agility covered on the Sodali vision card, and unit resistance is going to be covered on this new Final Fantasy IX card. Of course, you could always trade in Dark Tetra there as a substitute, and I think it would work just as well. Now the third card is going to be on Glaciella. That one's going to be a free choice, more or less. Here I've gone with the Nier Automata card. I do think that that's the best option. It's going to provide 35% luck as well as 25 crit damage to the party. That's going to help out not only our accuracy, but also our damage. Now I am going to be carrying the Arimon card there in Glassy's sub-slot. That's going to give us a bit of magic resistance, some attack value, as well as a healthy amount of dexterity there to up our crit rate. Now for the trust stones of the build, I do really want to push my accuracy here, so I'm going to be going with both luck and accuracy sets. Thankfully, Zidane's raw HP and agility isn't a good enough spot that I can afford to do that without really much of a drop-off for him. And of course, the stone passives here are going to be tailored specifically for this matchup. I'm going to be bringing in some light and magic resistance, as well as some crit damage and wind attack there on the offensive side. So you can see there in the stats, we're looking pretty good here all around. I do think this 400 to 420% hit rates that I have here is approximately where you're going to want to be to make sure that you can hit those min-maxed Helenas and Sterns out there on the battlefield. And you can see here, despite going all in on accuracy, the remaining stats are still in a pretty good spot. Just about 1500 attack, 114 agility, very, very solid. Even the defensive stats there, getting right around 30% unit and area resistance. So that is the build, guys. I do think it's a pretty solid one. As always, I'll drop a link to this one in the description below. So what is my verdict today on Zidane? Starting with the positives, Zidane's Punishing Blade attack, it's an incredible skill, nearly going toe-for-toe with Bradley's own Calculated Rend, giving Wind access to another elite barrier breaker who, outside of Edward Elric, is definitely a category they had tended to struggle with in the past. And Zidane here is doing that with one of the better agility values in the game. On top of that, he's going to be bringing in an all-new mechanic that he's able to seal the enemy's ability to remove courage, assuming that you are able to land that debuff onto them, making Zidane an important unit not only for protecting his own courage, but any other courage-focused units that you may have in your party. Zidane is also a unit that can achieve an impressive total of unit resistance if you do focus on it, helped on by his party buff where he's able to bring an additional 25% to himself and the party. Zidane is also bringing in some nice crit-focused mechanics in his kit as well, including a first-of-its-kind crit damage and peril, which, as I mentioned in my testing, is increasing any follow-up crits by approximately 18 to 20% in their damage total. Zidane also does have access to some very nice AP management perks, and he hasn't struggled in that department whatsoever for me so far. On the more negative side, this is a unit that's very much average in his accuracy, which in of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, the majority of units are actually in that average accuracy zone. Where it does fall apart for Zidane, though, is that he doesn't have any tools built to help him out in that department. No accuracy mastery, passive, or abilities. No accuracy buffs or skills with hit modifiers, or even any guaranteed hits. Adding to that, I really haven't been blown away by Zidane's damage potentials thus far, as I do think that you really need to go all out in terms of having the very best vision cards, including that upcoming Trials of Reckoning item, in order to get him to reach those high numbers of defense penetration, which at the end of the day I do think hurts him a little bit from a build flexibility standpoint. Now he does have a very nice follow-up attack that he does have access to, which does increase a bit of his damage, and had it been just a few short months ago, I think that would have absolutely been lighting everyone up in the game. However, what has happened actually over the last couple of months of the game is that unit resistance stat has really been inflated in the game, not only with units having more access to it, with equipment and cards having more access to it, but with everyone just being more focused and using that in their builds. So I do think even that follow-up damage has been dulled in a big way, just because of that development. Now lastly, Zidane does have two different weaknesses with both missile and pierce damage. Two damage types that I do think hold a lot of promise here for the short future, and two damage types that I think Gumi has been laying the groundwork in setting up some potential future metas. And with Zidane not really being truly dominant in this meta that he has been released in, I'm not sure how much promise that's going to hold for him in the future if those metas do come to pass. At the end of the day, I think the real miss for me with this unit really comes back to that 140 awakening skill, where if they had added maybe a 10 or 15% luck or a 15 to 20 flat accuracy there on top of what he's getting already, maybe add a 30 accuracy modifier onto one of his skills, I do think that this unit would have been in a bit better of a place, in terms of how you're able to build him for top-end PvP, where you do need to be ready for evasion at any time. As it stands, he certainly can cover and hedge that weakness. I certainly was able to do that in the build today, got to a very healthy hit rate. It's just that, in my opinion, I think that you do need to sacrifice a bit too much on the survivability and damage side in order to achieve it. And I think because of that, it does hold this unit back from being included in part of that top echelon of units. Now, even despite all of that, I do consider Zidane a strong overall character and is a unit that I do think can excel in many matchups. And his self 25% magic mitigation buff does allow him to hold up very well against magic damage in particular. I just think that he's a bit better suited to hold up against those unit attack damage dealers like a Saul or a Laya, rather than those heavy area damage units like a Helena, Bartz, or others. So there it is, guys. That is my review today on Zidane. Like I was saying there at the end, I don't consider this a bad unit by any means, just not one that's going to be jumping straight into that S tier for me. Perhaps in time, as the wind element grows in power or as his dagger group further develops, this is a unit that maybe could age very well over time. I can certainly see some potential for that. We'll just have to see what comes to pass here over the coming months. For fans of the character, I think there's a lot to work with here, but if Zidane or the wind element doesn't really hold any big draw for you, I think this is a unit that you'll be able to skip and really not miss a beat all that much in the game. So now you guys know what I think. I want to hear your thoughts and opinions now. Do you agree with my takes here on Zidane today, or are you seeing something that I missed? Definitely hit me up in the comments down below. And while you're down there, if you enjoyed the video today, hit that like button for me. It really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. And if you like what I'm doing here on the channel, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more. And that's really all that I have to say for today. So as always, stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.